Today we're looking at the Gettysburg Address. Hello, welcome to the Daily Bellringer. Please don't forget to subscribe and take a look at the questions down in the description. Also, don't forget to check out dailybellringer.com, where you'll find more resources that go with many of the Bellringer videos. In November of 1863, President Abraham Lincoln traveled from Washington, D.C. to the small town of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. About 4 months earlier, the bloodiest battle of the Civil War occurred there, with over 51,000 casualties combined between the Union and Confederacy. Lincoln had been asked to give a speech to dedicate the new cemetery here at Gettysburg, where the soldiers of the battle were buried. Lincoln had been invited not as the featured speaker. Instead, the featured speaker was Edward Everett, who was the former president of Harvard, a former Secretary of State, and known as one of the great speakers of the time. Lincoln was invited just 2 weeks before the event because the organizers thought the president should make some comments at the event. On November 19, 1863, approximately 15,000 people gathered here at Gettysburg for the dedication. Everett got up and spoke for 2 hours on the significance of the battle and the war. A small orchestra then played a hymn as an interlude as President Lincoln rose to give his speech. Lincoln spoke for less than 2 minutes with a speech that was only 272 words. There was just a small smattering of applause as the president took his seat. Many were shocked he was so brief. But despite the speech being short, as people began reading what Lincoln said in the newspapers, people began to realize that Lincoln had summarized everything the war was about and why the war had to be fought in this little speech. So what I would like to do here today, at the actual location where Lincoln gave the speech just behind me, I would like to take a few moments here to go through the words of that speech and break it down of what Lincoln had to say. 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Arguably the most famous part of the speech, but what was Lincoln saying? 77 years ago. A score is 20, so 80 would be 80 plus 7 would be 87 years. If you look at the year 1863 and subtract 87, you get 1776. So Lincoln was pointing to the founding of the nation and especially the Declaration of Independence that said all men are created equal. This is exactly where Lincoln had gone during the Lincoln-Douglas debates to make a moral argument against the spread of slavery and the hypocrisy of our Declaration while slavery was allowed to exist. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. Now we have to think about how the United States was founded as a democracy in an age of monarchies or kings during the American Revolution. To many, especially European powers, the United States was simply an experiment that they were waiting to see fail. Many thought the Civil War was proof that a democracy could not stand. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that that nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. Here he recognizes those that gave the ultimate sacrifice so the nation might live. Again, he is coming back to the preserving the Union, which was the primary objective. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. Lincoln stresses the importance of history and that we cannot add or take away from history, but we must learn from it and never lose it from our memories. It is for us, the living, rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from those honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion, that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain. Lincoln here puts full responsibility on Americans to not let these soldiers' efforts and sacrifices be for nothing. He says the great task remaining before us, which could mean several things: winning the war, bringing the Union back together, and when you think about the fact that the Emancipation Proclamation had just been issued in January of 1863, he is probably alluding to race relations as well, something that is a great task that still stands before us as a nation. Then he ends with the famous line that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people shall not perish from the earth. He again goes to the founding of the nation with Christian principles by stressing under God, and goes on to say a new birth of freedom, which he is alluding to the new freedom that will be gained by enslaved people if the Union is victorious, which again was a new focus as the Emancipation Proclamation had been issued. He describes what democracy is all about, stating a government of the people, by the people, for the people, a government where people have the power. Now, this is where I argue why Lincoln is the greatest president. Lincoln recognized the eyes of the world were on the United States and seen whether or not a democracy could withstand a civil war. Lincoln knew if he could not preserve the Union, it would show the world that democracies would fail. And if it did fail, our nation would not exist today. So it is thanks to Lincoln's perseverance that our nation and democracy still remains to this day. So with that, hopefully you learned something, and thanks for watching.